All right, welcome back to another Pro Chat with Peter Sanders. I'm your host, Chris Chaney. I'm the managing editor and product and marketing manager here at Swing U. It's been a few weeks since we've done one of these chats. Peter, how have you been?
Great, thanks. Yeah, I miss them.
Likewise. So get back into this here. And as you guys may recall, we've gone over putting, the two distinct skills that encapsulates that facet, as well as the short game in our recent episodes, chipping, pitching, and the sand game. So we're continuing to move back from the green today with a more in-depth chat on the approach game. As always with these, we're piggybacking these chats on the work that Peter has done with his skills clinics, or as we're calling them at Swing U, the performance practice guides. The practice guides for approach will be available in the Swing U Clubhouse and in your app feeds as always. For today's chat, Peter and I will go over some of the more noteworthy statistics he's come across in his decades-long career that may help you at home diagnose and guide your next practice session as it pertains to approaching the green. So Peter, let's start with an overview of the approach game. What can you tell us about being successful in this facet and how amateur golfers such as ourselves and our viewers should go about setting some realistic expectations?
Yeah, it's a facet very much like the ones we've gone through with the short game and putting, that there's four directions that you have to worry about: long, short, right, left, and as opposed to driving, where basically it's right, left is the problem, and the goal is hitting the greens. Or if you can't hit the green, ending up with a less problematic result, either hitting away from the pins, or if you miss the green, somewhere where it's a relatively easy up and down. So the decision making is very important in this, in terms of the club selection, the shot selection with that club, and your pre-shot routine and your confidence in executing the shot. And as we'll talk about a little bit, some of the factors that go into that. We've created the approach skills test that you talked about for men and women, because their capabilities or their distances are different. Although it's not as much as it used to be, obviously, and those we won't talk about here because the instructions are included, on the website. To off, one has to determine where their approach skills are in relation to their handicap, where they want to be, and the Swing U program will tell them that. It'll tell them, the relative number of shots they're having and the relative success with those shots, as well as overall and their strokes gained in that facet relative to their other parts of their game. So if it's a strength, you want to see why it's a strength, and then play to that strength. If it's a weakness, you want to see exactly where in the approach shot world you need to improve. So important is the average number of attempts, and our analysis gives you that. And we put together some graphs of the average by handicap range, men and women, the average success on hitting greens from every yardage distance that we contemplate. And it's important to know in this that those are not greens and regulations. They are when any approach shot, regardless of where it falls in the string of shots on a hole, any approach shot greater than 50 yards actually hits the green. And so that's what we're on about there. We also give people their greens and regulation, which are very important.
Yeah, Peter, I just want to jump in there and kind of piggyback off what you said about the greens and regulation. This is something that you and I have talked about, and I've mentioned to you a few times. This is something that kind of, at first blush, throws me for a loop. Every approach shot that hits the green is not necessarily a green in regulation. And to explain to our users why that is because how our system dictates approach or reads approach is your first attempt to hit the green. Our approach shot is our first attempt to hit the green, and our second shot on a par 4 or a third shot on a par 5 is not necessarily that shot. right? So we're saying you hit the ball offline in the woods, whatever, you're punching out on a par 4. That next shot, that second shot is not your approach shot. Your first approach shot may come from 75 yards after a punch out on your third shot into the green. You hit the green on your first approach shot. That's not a green in regulation, correct? Similarly, there's that option on par 5s as well. So that's something I think is instructive to know for our viewers, that a well-struck drive in a good position will likely result in a good approach shot that has a chance to hit the green in regulation, but it's not necessarily always a green in regulation with your first approach.
Right. Yeah, and that's I'm glad you brought that up. As we discussed in our pre-podcast meetings, I had a lot of instructors over the years that thought when you indicated you you had to indicate hitting the green in regulation as an approach shot, regardless of where it happened. And I was always amazed that a professional golf instructor would not realize the difference between a GIR approach and a non-GIR approach. But that's what it is. So did you have something else to say before we get into strategy?
Yeah, so that's kind of just wanted to set you up for that, Peter. So I think the GIR piece was something that we have spoken about, and I want to kind of clarify there that not necessarily every approach shot into the green is for a green in regulation, as there are a myriad of different things that could go wrong, right? As we know with our own games, it could be a punch out, it could be a drive into a penalty area where you're hitting your second, your third or fourth shot into a green. That would be considered your approach shot, but not necessarily a green in regulation. So moving on to strategy, as you mentioned, Peter, let's dive into how you go about assessing the strategy of approach shots. What kind of way do you think about these shots? And something that we've talked about in other ways, I think with chipping and pitching specifically.
Yeah, and I think everybody should be thinking about their approach opportunities in these ways, and they certainly do with the tour players that I've worked with. I like to use the stoplight example, the green light, yellow light, red light. And the green light is you have a good lie, you have a distance with which you're comfortable, and an accessible pin. And I'd say in those instances, you go for the pin and you try to knock down that flag stick. Then you have a yellow light where the green is accessible, but perhaps maybe not the pin, or something with the lie or the wind or whatever. And there you play for the fat of the green, or you get hit it pin high and you shade toward the middle of the green and avoid, a miss. And then finally the red light situation where you have a difficult distance, a difficult lie, a shot where you're really not very comfortable. And so, and I say, then you pick fat of the green or a side of the green or a place on the green that would not be a bad miss, something that would be a fairly easy up and down. And so we have to go through those and pick one. And then I say from there, one needs to focus in on that shot, even if it's to miss the green, and hit it with confidence. Right.
And now as we kind of get to the results of this, right, we come to one of my favorite statistics, which is proximity to the hole. I say favorite facetiously, as I've heard you rail against this for as long as I've known you. So when we think about approach shots, right, we always kind of the standard chronological order there is the next shot, right? The proximity of the hole. How far are you? Now, Peter, I'm setting you up. Tell us why proximity arguably could be the most overrated stat in golf.
Yeah, it came up several years ago and was publicized as the nirvana of scoring, that it was the most important part of the scoring game. And I just rail against that because the game is, 5 facets and it's a puzzle, and there's no one thing that is the important thing. But Anyway, so as you said, proximity. If you're thinking about proximity when you're picking your shot, it means you're just trying to hit it closer to the green than the middle or whatever. So I have two gripes. Well, one main gripe with the PGA Tour over the way they uh, calculate their proximity to the hole that some people think is so important, and that is that any shot hit within 30 yards of the edge of the green uh, falls into that category of proximity. So the two things happen. First of all, it could be in the fringe, which that's fine, or in the fairway, but it could also be buried under the lip of a bunker or in the water. And people say, well, wait a minute, how could it measure the proximity of a ball hitting the water? The shuttling guys laser the splash. And so I wrote, and then the compaction on the entire tour is because any shot that misses by more than 30 yards from the edge of the green doesn't count. So it really is kind of a fake, I think, a fake stat. And someone have asked me, why do you think they do that? Well, I think they do it because their advertisement is how good these guys are good, and they are good. So there's no negative stats on the 650 stats that the tour publishes on every player and every round. Even three putts, they turned into a positive of three putt avoidance. And so they give a positive. But you can't find a penalty in the tour stats. You can't find those. So I think they didn't want very random bad shots to be included in a stat of great players. But anyway, so I saw an example that highlighted my gripe when Tiger Woods was playing in the Honda Classic, and I think it was oh God, doesn't matter, but it was years ago, and he finished 12th in the event, but he was number one in proximity to the hole. And so I took a look because I had watched that tournament, and I said, wait a minute, he had two balls in the water coming down the stretch on that final par three, and they were close to the pin, but they were in the water. And I dug into the shot length data, and sure enough, they were counted as the proximities, even though he had to drop 100 yards or more away from the green. So I wrote an article about it, and people can see it. Is Tiger's number one proximity to the hole a meaningless stat? And it was on Golf WRX. But anyway, in 2018. And so then you had something else you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so we understand, right, that the tour is taking proximity inside of that distance from the pin. Like you mentioned, you could dump it in the water like Tiger did. I think we had another example we talked about with Jon Rahm at the Waste Management this year, where their proximity stats are skewed that way. And we've talked about this in the past. Shot length, for all of its how great it is, right? These are volunteers who are shooting these things. So
yeah,
there's some room for error there. The one piece I just wanted you to clarify here is Swing U, how we do it and why that's different, and how this kind of allows us. One, and just to kind of piggyback off the volunteer point, this is you and I keeping our own stats, where the only person we're cheating by lying is ourselves in that way. Whereas there could be some good-natured, good-hearted folks who are unintentionally skewing stats. That's not the case with us, but that's neither here nor there. Can you just tell us a little bit about how Swing U does it compared to the tour?
Well, yeah. Swing U does it by the distance of the first putt on every green. If it's been an approach shot, we now know the proximity, and so we do that. And I'd say the tour can do it because they have they have the technology. You and I can't say, "Oh God, we hit it in the water and that was, so far away from the pin." I guess
Right.
we could average it, but we can't shoot the splash. So it's an important difference, and I think for me it's a fundamental difference. That what good is proximity if you've missed? A miss is a miss, and
Right.
and so anyway, that's what we've chosen to do.
Right. So, and kind of just to hammer home this point, Peter, we've talked about this, and we've talked on numerous occasions about your work with Zach Johnson, multiple major winner, and you've had the good fortune of working with Zach for a while now. Can you just explain to us how that eureka, that aha moment came when you were trying to explain to Zach and his team about the meaninglessness, if that's a word, or the overrated or the overemphasis that's put on proximity?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories, and I think I've worn it out, but maybe not. So I was giving Zach and his team the go to the year-end wrap-up, which we do every year, of his performance relative to the rest of the tour and top tens and all that. And when I got to my approach segment, suddenly there were more questions than I'd ever gotten on anything. I mean, they do butt and ask, and it's a great group of guys. Zach's put together a wonderful team, and I couldn't be more proud to be a part of it. But there were questions on proximity to the hole, and that all led to the fact: should Zach be striving for better proximities? So there was a moment of silence, and I thought to myself, I know the answer to this question, but I don't want to blurt something out that I can't explain and I can't prove. So I said to them, okay, next time we get together, I will have a study and I will let you know what I think about proximity and all that. So I went home and I did a study, which you've now posted on Swing U, I hope. And I came back and we got together unusually quickly. We don't meet all that much, or they don't invite me all that much. And so I said, hey, I have an answer for you on proximity to the hole. And so I gave them a three really good mathematical reasons why proximity wasn't the thing to do, and they were all pretty satisfied and nodding their heads and smiling and maybe a little head spinning by all the math that I had just showed them and the statistics. So I thought, here's my punchline, and I said, hey, does anybody here know who was the best at proximity to the hole in this past season that we're talking about? And they looked around. No, nobody didn't. And I was really surprised that Zach's agent didn't know, because he's a big stat guy and he was also one of the proximity questioning guys. And so I said, oh, okay. Well, I looked it up. It was Ryan Armour, and he's ranked, way up here and way over there in strokes gained approach, which is important, and greens in regulation. He's not very good at that. And he was ranked 160th on tour in the money, so he's probably not going to be out there next year. And they started laughing at that, and Zach jumped out of his chair, which he's not a demonstrative guy. And he goes, Pete, I got it. Just hit the greens. And then that was the end of that.
Right. And Peter, you've gone over this a couple of times. So Zach Johnson has his aha moment. As we know, the pros are playing a different game than us, but there's a statistical tidbit that you've come across as it pertains to distance from the hole and putting and down in value, as well as scrambling. That kind of illustrates why it's more important for us amateurs to hit greens versus going flag hunting with regard to proximity. Can you please just kind of share that statistical instance?
Yeah, one of my points to Zach and his team was the relative cost of missing a green relative to in relation to the cost if you're at an average. You hit another green at the average on tour, which is like 34 feet, and it calculates to be 46% or 42% of a shot, because they get up and down. Their scrambling is 58%. So that's, just basic math. So if we apply that same standard to the average golfer, whose scrambling ability is 17% of the time, their cost of missing the green, as opposed to being 40 feet, is 0.8 of a shot. That's virtually a shot, and that does not factor in the relatively high rate of errors in short game that they experience. So that's a whole nother thing. So I would say, bottom line, missing a green as opposed to hitting it in the middle of the green to 40 feet is actually worth, for the average golfer, more than a shot.
Yeah, very interesting, Peter. Yeah, I think it's very, very instructive there to kind of explain the fact that the tour average, as you mentioned, scrambling for them, they have the ability to go after those flags a little bit more, I don't know when to say recklessly, but a little bit maybe more aggressively.
Yes.
And they can kind of rely upon their skill sets there, that they're able to get the ball up and down some 60% of the time nearly. Whereas, like you mentioned, for the average golfer, a 15 to 19 handicap, that number is less than 20%. So you're staring bogey in the face right off the get-go, more or less. And then, as you mentioned, the errors, the three putts, everything else that kind of comes into play there can make that missed green turn from a bogey to a double or a triple pretty quickly. So, Peter, as always, this has been very enlightening and helpful. Appreciate all of your thoughts and insights here, and looking forward to our next chat.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, and once again, guys, as Peter mentioned, we have some nice graphs here that we've mocked up, and I encourage you to follow us on social media. It's at SwingU app on all Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You'll be able to find these graphs as well on the website and on our social media accounts. And one final thing I'd like to point out, and I've mentioned this to you guys in a previous email here in the last couple of weeks, but on app.swingu.com, Peter's full kind of suite of statistics here that breaks down your game as you've recorded it in SwingU Pro strokes gained from different facets of yardages for approach are available for you to find and see kind of now more than ever outside of the app. On the web, they will be coming to your app in some form or fashion in the coming weeks and months. But right now, you can take a deeper dive on app.swingu.com. You log in with your normal app credentials, and you're able to see all of your statistics in a very granular fashion. The same things that we are providing to our ambassadors who are chasing the dream on tour, our college coaches and players at high level D1 schools who are getting ready for NCAAs, and then folks like me and you who are maybe just some pipe dreams looking to win a club championship, something like that. So I would encourage you guys to check that out as always. But lastly, once again, Peter, I just want to say thank you so much again for all of your thoughts, your expertise, and the fun stories you share with us today.
Thanks, Chris.
As always, fairways and greens. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.